Observations for Our Time, Volume 2, Religious Poison, Pushing People Away from God, Chapter 10. J.O. longs to meet you, Hylel, The Rise and Fall of Babel. Richer for the journey, we have arrived at our initial destination, the 14th chapter of Yahowah, Isaiah. It was here that we expected to find Yahowah affirming the connections between Babylon and Satan that we had sought to validate. I do not anticipate that we will be disappointed. The chapter begins with a simple statement, affirming Yahowah's enduring love for Israel. It not only obliterates any possibility that God has somehow replaced his fondness for Jacob with a newfound desire to be compassionate towards a church comprised of Gentiles, it demonstrates that he is merciful towards those he loves and that he is reliable because he will never change. Further, in the midst of the carnage preceding his return, Yahowah will once again side with his people, choosing them all over again. By contrast and indeed key, rather and instead, surely and truly, emphasizing this point, Yahowah will show compassion and love Racham, will show mercy as a result of his affectionate relationship with, concern about and kind pale and perfect active, Israel is the beneficiary of God's ongoing compassion and will become loving as a result toward Jacob, one who supplants his heels, heir to the covenant, synonym for Israel. He will once again choose Wabach road, and so he still strongly prefers and will subsequently select, willing to bear witness and say beyond what might be expected that he genuinely desires and will now actually approve and simultaneously accept, providing testimony that he will re-enter into the covenant with Kal perfect, will actually and reliably at this moment choose to be with by Israel, individuals who engage and endure with God. Furthermore, while he will restore them to, placing them in Nuach Ba, he will set them in and allow them to settle in and remain upon, forming a restful alliance with them within, from Ruach, spirit, their own land Adamahem, their soil, their ground, and their earth. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:1. This is one of the great enigmas of human history. How is it that billions of people believe that these words were inspired by God while, at the same time, completely negating their implications? Christianity and Islam are both destroyed by this declaration, as is Rabbinic Judaism and socialist secular humanism. God chose to form a covenant relationship with Abraham and fell in love with Sarah, Yitzchak, and Jacob. The promises he made to each of them, as they are presented in the Torah, he will keep, including his preference for their descendants over all others, demonstrating this by his steadfast devotion and mercy toward them. God is not impressed by religion or works, by prestige or power, but instead by family. Israel is Yahowah's family. That will never change. He loves them. It is a declaration he would never make of a church, synagogue, or mosque. I wish that this was the end of this statement, but it's not. If we are to interpret what follows literally, God may not kill or banish every foe of Israel. Some may become their servants and slaves. This could be Yahowah's way of making them pay for what they have done. Those who have sought to oppress Israel will be oppressed by them. Fair is fair. I say may only because in the 4th verse this edict will be called a mashal, parable, or word picture, a means of conveying ethical teaching in a memorable way. But that aside, having to serve ethical people in menial ways will actually be a reprieve for Israel's oppressors. They are all destined for a far worse fate. So this might actually be a way of reinforcing the reason such punishments are justified and of letting his children know that he will hold those who sought to enslave and kill them accountable. While my personal bias against having servants should be irrelevant, since I've mentioned it, I'd like to share my bias. I prefer doing my own work because I enjoy the process and the result. Further, I'm uncomfortable depriving anyone of their free will. But I'm just a man, not God, so I'm not responsible for holding abusive people accountable for what they have done. God is. Therefore, aliens Wahager, those who are foreigners from a cultural group other than Israel, lacking in inheritance and deprived of rights, decomposed and lifeless will accompany Lawa, will be bound in indenture to, will be lent to Nifil perfect pass of the Malahem, and while they will be assigned to Capchal, they will be appointed and attached to, even shared with Nifil perfect pass of the house Beeth, the family and home of Jacob, one who supplants his heels, heir to the covenant, synonym for Israel. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:1. There is one aspect of this, beyond holding abusers liable, that I especially like, and that is that there will be work to be done during the millennial celebration of the Sukkot Shabbat. Work not only builds character, it creates value. It builds discipline, increases personal responsibility, enhances our ability to achieve, and it's enjoyable. Then while many within the family Rab, numerous among the chosen people Rabbis from the great Isaiah scroll as it is omitted in the Masoretic text will take them Lakahem, will obtain, collect, receive, and accept them, grasp hold of them, own them, possess them, and benefit from them Kal perfect active and bring them Bohim, and will transport them to their region in Eretz Wa, to their land or territory and from the great Isaiah scroll to their dwelling place El Makomhem, to their homes and offices, to their sources a means to take a stand. The Housewabeeth, family of Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God will take possession of them Nasuhem, will receive them as an inheritance, accepting them as a legitimate transfer of property, and will appropriately own them upon on Yahowah's earth Adama, land, ground, and soil as law, for bond servants and slaves Ebed, as male subordinates who are owned and sold to work for them, from Abad, to work, labor, perform, and servant as while maids Shifcha, female servants and slave girls. So it will come to be that Wahaya, it will come to exist that those who have been their captives Lashabahem, those who had been plundered by them and taken prisoner will take them as prisoners to Ba, they will take them as captives, as a spoil of war, and while they will rule over Ada, they will subdue, govern, and control them, they will dominate and subjugate, exercising considerable authority over Kal perfect different form in the great Isaiah scroll those who oppressed them Nagazhim, those who exploited them and taxed them, their taskmasters who drove them as slaves, even those who acted as tyrants or lords over them Kal active. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:2. It is often possible, even sometimes preferable, to translate Abad as associate or co-worker, but not in this case. If this is to be interpreted literally instead of allegorically, these men and women are prisoners, and as such, they will be working as slaves. While that may sound arcane to modern ears, and perhaps even cruel, consider what happens when those who deliberately abuse innocent people are forgiven. Then consider what these individuals were doing when they were captured and where they will be going. For them, this is actually a reprieve, one which reveals God's sense of justice and His love for His people. It is impossible for a family or community to prosper and grow unless beneficial achievements and nurturing behaviors are encouraged, celebrated, and rewarded while harmful actions and abusive deeds are discouraged, scorned, and punished. Without exception, the men and women now living as servants in Israel will fare far better over the ensuing millennia than similar souls who have earned an express ticket to Sheol. Beyond this, the sight of a pope down on his knees, dressed as a sanitation engineer, cleaning public latrines in an Israeli neighborhood will satisfy our desire to have religious scum humiliated for having been so pompous and cavalier, knowingly leading so many astray while pretending to speak for God. An Islamic jihadist responsible for maiming Jewish women and children in a bomb or knife attack, now serving those they sought to murder and mutilate, has a certain appeal to it. After all, it's not like either is going to mouth off, spewing their vitriol, knowing that by doing so they'd forestall their parole from eternal anguish and Sheol. It will come to pass Wahaya, then it will be in that day Yahowah will restore you and provide a favorable, restful, and spiritual alliance Nuwak, will renew your body, empowering you spiritually, placing you in close association by setting you in a beneficial situation to fill infinitive construct, removing you from the pain and suffering associated with your anguishing works-oriented religious worship La Ataminat Sabata, separating you from the mental anguish and unfavorable circumstances resulting from your strenuous toil involved with your offensive reverence for pagan imagery, a false deity, and an expenditure of considerable energy as well as from your turmoil and trepidation while Minro Gazada, as well as away from your troubling agitation, affliction, and accompanying anger, especially from Waman the unyielding and cruel Hakasha, the harsh and hard, the difficult and troublesome, and the severe and rigorous work of Buddha, laborious jobs, ministerial duties and religious practices. Military campaigns and forced labor, even compelled submission to lords as slaves in Wachashire, wherein they forced you to serve Abad Bahada, they compelled you to do, reducing you to servitude in the pualist imperfect conjugation the object passively suffers the effect for a finite period of time the verb is written differently in the great Isaiah scroll than in the Masoretic text. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:3. It is a shame that Christians, largely as a result of Paul's poison pen, have been hoodwinked into believing that the God of the Old Testament wants to deprive people of their free will, essentially enslaving them by demanding that they obey a countless array of arcane laws, when He is steadfastly committed to our liberation. In fact, He wants to free humanity from the very institutions which have been conceived to misrepresent His nature and oppress His people. It's Christianity that is works-oriented, while the Torah frees us from toil. As mentioned a moment ago, the fact that Yahowah is calling what we have just read in Mashal, parable, opens up a number of interesting possibilities. The story presented in a parable can be fictitious, so long as the lesson it conveys is true. Almost all of Yahowah's parables were used for this approach to teaching. Therefore, it is entirely possible that the preceding depiction of those who enslaved becoming slaves was written to convey Yahowah's promise to hold them accountable, to send them to a place where they will be deprived of the very freedoms they usurped from their subjects. As they did to others, it will be done to them. Of particular interest, the preceding presentation is being directed at the ruler of Babel, who is Satan. It, therefore, underscores why the adversary has sought to be known and worshipped as Bel or Baal, the Lord. Satan and his accomplices oppress and subjugate. they control the masses as if the people were property. In that day Wabahayom, at that time you will lift up NASA, you will accept, bear, carry, and raise call perfect act of this particular mashal, proverb and parable ha-mashal haze, this comparative word picture, this story which may be factual or fictional and is told to illustrate an ethical point, to provide guidance, and to build character, this isolated descriptive reference or likeness presented as a similitude or example to teach, affirm, criticize, refute, or in jest to mock, this vivid and easily remembered comparative communication designed to enlighten and facilitate good decision-making against thou, in front of the ruler Melech, the one who influences and controls a society, religion, government, and military, the authority figure or king who demands submission and obedience, the focus and head of an institution whose directives his subjects ponder and consider, from Malach, reigning source of counsel and advice who conveys the message people are compelled to follow of Babel, confusion Babel, of Babylon, of corruption resulting from commingling and intermixing, a compound of Ba, within Bel, Lord, the Hebrew basis of Bible. And you will say Wymar, you will express in words, bringing delight, and questioning, O Halak. In this way in the midst of these extraordinary circumstances the onslaught of the systematic and boisterous promotion of mistaken beliefs Madhibat, the deceptive disease and misleading pandemic clothed so as to appear common, the enticement into destructive and deadly behavior, strife and quarrelsome dissension, raging persecution from the great Isaiah scroll because the Masoretic text inexplicitly replaces the onslaught with the golden city has ceased Shabbat, has abated and has been given a rest, has even been made to observe the Shabbat. In this way in the midst of these extraordinary circumstances from the great Isaiah scroll the exploitation, manipulation, and corruption nagas, the oppressive desire to extract payment, of the abusive imposition of authority and lordship, the misuse of power, and the desire to govern, rule, control, tax, and demand tribute has been abated Shabbat, has ceased and been given a rest, observing a Shabbat. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:4. Considering what follows Babel, confusion, there should be no question in anyone's mind as to where it is manifest. There are only two institutions capable of madhibat, systematically and boisterously promoting mistaken beliefs while at the same time nagas, exploiting, manipulating, and corrupting people to the degree depicted here in religion and government. So God is saying that, by eliminating the confusing nature of religious and political Babel, He will rid the world of their caustic and malignant influence. Let it be known the most egregious and prolific progenitors of Babel, confusing corruption are the institutions most people revere, religion and government. God is not only opposed to both, He is going to assure that they cease operations. The implications of this are astonishing. Rather than having to listen to clerics and politicians boast that they were called by God to serve, we will find Yahowah silencing them. Rather than governments and religious institutions claiming that they are responsible for the people's liberty, prosperity, security, and salvation, Yahowah, who is actually providing these things for His people, will obliterate these very institutions for their exploitation and manipulation of His people. I've said it until I'm blue in the face, goddamn religion! The guy who shouted wolf has been proven right. A wolf in sheep's clothing, feigning divine inspiration while claiming God had given him exclusive rights to shepherd Gentiles, devoured 10 billion souls without anyone standing up against him, at least until now. The religion Shaul and his ilk founded will cease to exist. But it's not just religion that Yahowah will be eliminating. He is also opposed to political, military, and economic oppression. Such authority is always Rasha, invalid and incorrect, unethical and improper. As such, Yahowah will break every implement and symbol of human authority and control. For the past 6,000 years they have been the devil's tools. Yahowah has broken Shabawar, has smashed, fractured, crushed, and destroyed, has reacquired, stripped, and demolished the underlying and inferior staff, scepter, spear, and club mate, the lesser and lower branches affiliations, sticks, and rods of the religious, political, military, and economic oppression of the invalid and incorrect Rasha, unrighteous and wicked, evil and guilty, unjust and unethical, the improper and condemned, the proverbial quotes and tools used by rulers to control people of the family of nations Shabbat Mashal, the bywords and symbols of governmental authority used by the major subdivisions of countries and related geopolitical powers to exert their dominion. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:5. All any of us can do today is throw Yahowah's words against them. We can expose and condemn religious, governmental, economic, and military leaders and their institutions using evidence and reason. But God is not limited in this regard. He can and will obliterate all traces of man's maniacal mechanisms. The macaw, afflictions, plagues, and body blows Yahowah is going to inflict upon Madog Adam, the Gentiles and nations which sought to impose their control over others, Murdab, systematically depriving people of their rights, will commence just 15 years from the time I write these words in early 2018. It's time to choose whose side you want to be on. He will strike and destroy Naga, he will conquer and subdue, smiting and scourging the people related individuals in righteous indignation by Abra, with intense displeasure and unbridled disappointment, and an outpouring of anger and wrath with unfailing and unceasing filthy Sarah, unstopping and unrelenting body blows, afflictions, and plagues macaw, impairments, calamities, and defeats, scourging and slaughter who sought to subdue and control, rule over and govern, imposing their authority by trampling down the liberty of the Gentiles Radog Adam, who tried to dominate the nations as dictators or autocrats, imposing themselves upon the masses, establishing rules and legislating, subjugating and overpowering, lifting themselves up by beating the Gentiles down and with grievous moreover with anger and long-suffering systematic deprivation of rights and free will murder, miserable persecution, bitter harassment, and anguishing maltreatment without restraint will I, never withholding their destructive corruption, sparing no one. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:6. It's simply a matter of justice, of being fair, of holding people accountable, and of protecting one's family from harm. Any other response would be unjust and unconscionable. We are all aware that the politically correct and religious have been conned into believing otherwise, but look at the consequence. In a world where truth is demeaned and those who convey it are harassed, all while the best liars prevail and are rewarded, the vast preponderance of people have lost the ability to exercise good judgment, to be moral, or just. The result is a planet in the throes of death, quivering between vein and file. Fortunately, this malfeasance and idiocy won't last much longer. The distributors of this poison and those lapping it up will soon cease to exist. And with these caustic and counterproductive elements removed, the earth will be transformed into the conditions experienced during Adam and Hawwa's stay in the Garden of Eden. With all traces of religion and politics, weapons and soldiers, judicial systems and police, governments and economic schemes, in addition to all forms of corruption and pollution swept away, the climate will be changed to perfection. The planet will be restored to the beauty and vitality of the life originally intended. In a bit of irony, while this may be what environmentalists seek, there will be none left to applaud, a consequence of their passion for politics. Almost everything man has built and treasured will be gone, replaced by what God values. This is the reason that the lone prerequisite of the covenant is to disassociate from the ways of man. It explains why we were told about Eden. It is affirmed by the fact that the doorway to life, Pesach, leads to Sukkah, to camping out with God. We are returning to the beginning, which is why God's story must be read from start to finish if you want to move in the right direction. Yahowah's perspective on what will make heaven perfect, the enjoyable, enriching, enlightening, empowering, and loving experience he envisions and has promised, is the antithesis of what man has sought to convey, largely because those prone to describe it will be excluded from it. There will not be so much as a hint of religion or politics, absolutely no patriotism nor militaries, no churches, synagogues, mosques, or shrines, no choirs, preachers, popes, or Bibles, no police or judicial systems, no arguments over capitalism or communism, democracy or monarchy, no economic stratification nor any societal hierarchy. Faith will give way to reason, wrong to right, darkness to light, death to life. This is what it means to be renewed and restored. The entire Kol Earth Eretz, land and material realm is a home that rests spiritually nuak, is a settled and restful dwelling, an allied and favorable place to live, association and circumstance, secure and relaxed, at peace hot, calm and quiet, reconciled and satisfying, without any provocation or fighting, restored, liberated, and bursting forth patched, renewed, tranquil, and starting over, cheerful and free, separated, delivered, set apart, and ready to break out, opening up in song and shouting for joy Rina, rejoicing, making beautiful music, and communicating a jubilant message. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:7. This is Sukkah. For the first time since Yahowah and Adam camped out in the garden together 6,000 years ago, God will call Earth home. We will explore the planet together, celebrate life, learn from one another, and sing uplifting songs, completely free, all while participating in the covenant. The earth is now at rest, enjoying 1,000-year Shabbat. It is home to Yahowah's spiritual children, the beneficiaries of Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. The next illustration is symbolic of what will be occurring. God is using one of my favorite things, a mountain breeze blowing through evergreen conifers, as a way of conveying the eternal joy experienced by those invited to camp out with our Creator. The cedars of Lebanon were used to construct Yahowah's and Dad's homes on Mount Moriah. Moreover, their long lives are emblematic of their enduring nature. They are deeply rooted and able to withstand the blusterous winds of change, standing firm, tall, and upright, reaching up toward the sky, continually transforming light into energy to grow. Moreover, the sincere and honest evergreen branches bar oush, the pure and truthful who are upright and living, The cleansed and stately conifers rejoice the match, are outwardly delighted and happy for you Yahowah, on your approach and on your behalf. The cedars are as, the large, enduring, and fragrant trees which are ideal for building lasting homes of Lebanon, and ha-Lebanon, of those clothed in white, from Labas, Leba, and Laban, adorned in fiery white light. Edition of Hylel from the great Isaiah scroll saying Amar, declaring, from the time as you became an active Jacob, you were laid low until now. So from the great Isaiah scroll, no one has come up to cut low Allah Kirat, no one is sent to cut a covenant as an Alananu, for us or nearest from the great Isaiah scroll. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:8. If I'm reading this correctly, the joyful evergreens and the stately and enduring cedars are Gentile covenant members who are now celebrating Israel's return to favor. There was a brief period during the time of Daud and his son that they were highly valued, making a tangible contribution to the great homes built on Moriah. But alas, they would be ravaged by Egyptians and Assyrians, Greeks and Romans, and endure the past 1,400 years surrounded by the shrill, unproductive, and anti-Semitic shouts of Muslims. In this light, the concluding remarks suggest that the neglect they suffered during the past 2,500 years of Israel has been inactive, failing to sustain and build Yahowah's covenant home, is now over. The cedars are shown as excited because the Gentiles, who manifest their best qualities, know that they will be used in a productive way once again, as they are cut into the covenant relationship. This has all served as an especially revealing beginning to what is sure to be an extraordinary chapter. Yahowah has reaffirmed that throughout time, from the beginning to the culmination of events, Israel has retained its distinction as God's chosen people. Once again, Yahowah loves what the world hates and hates what the world craves. We also learned that our Heavenly Father is going to tangibly demonstrate the true nature of love, which is to not only protect his family, but to punish those who have sought to harm them. Then he is going to renew the earth, restoring life to the way it was in Eden. By contrast, Yahowah will show compassion and love toward Jacob. He will once again choose Israel because he still strongly prefers to be with them. Furthermore, he will restore them and place them in their own land. Those who are foreigners from a cultural group other than Israel, lacking in inheritance and deprived of rights, decomposing in lifelessness, will accompany them, indentured to them, and they will be assigned to the house of Jacob. 14:1. Many within the family will bring them to their region and to their dwelling place, even to their homes and offices. The house of Israel, individuals who engage and endure with God will take possession of them, accepting them as a legitimate transfer of property and spoil of war upon Yahowah's earth, as male bond servants and as female maids and slave girls. So it will come to be that those who had been their captives will take them as prisoners, and they will rule over those who oppressed them and exploited them. 14:2. It will come to pass in that day that Yahowah will restore you and provide a favorable, restful, and spiritual alliance, renewing your body while empowering you spiritually, placing you in close association by setting you in a beneficial situation, removing you from the pain and suffering associated with your anguishing works-oriented religious worship and the unfavorable circumstances associated with your strenuous toil, from your turmoil and trepidation, your affliction, and accompanying anger, forced labor, and compelled submission. 14:3. At this time you will lift up, accepting and raising this particular martial proverb, this comparative word picture told to illustrate an ethical point, to provide guidance, and to build character, which is presented as a similitude to teach, affirm, criticize, refute, and mock, and thereby facilitate good decision-making, against the ruler, in opposition to the one who influences and controls governments and religions, so that ye disapprove of the authority figure who seeks submission and obedience associated with Babel, confusion, with Babylon, and with the corruption resulting from commingling and intermixing in the Lord's Bible. And you will say, oh how the onslaught of the systematic and boisterous promotion of mistaken beliefs had ceased, the enticement into destructive and deadly behavior and quarrelsome dissension is over. In this way, and in the midst of these extraordinary circumstances, this exploitation, manipulation, and corruption, has come to an end, as well as the abusive imposition of authority and the misuse of power. Even the desire to govern, control, tax, and demand tribute has been abated by observing the Shabbat. 14:4. Yahowah has broken the underlying and inferior staff, scepter, spear, and club of religious, political, military, and economic oppression of the invalid and incorrect, with these things serving as the proverbial quotes and tools used by rulers to control people, as the bywords and symbols of governmental authority used by nations and geopolitical powers to exert their dominion, shattering them. 14:5. Then he will strike and destroy the people in righteous indignation with unfailing and unceasing body blows, afflictions, and plagues, especially those who sought to subdue and control, rule over and govern, imposing their authority by trampling down the liberty of the Gentiles, those who tried to dominate the nations as dictators or autocrats, imposing themselves upon the masses, establishing rules and legislating, lifting themselves up by beating the Goyim down with a grievous and systematic deprivation of rights and free will without restraint, sparing no one. 14:6. The entire earth is now a home and is at rest spiritually, at peace without any provocation or fighting, restored, liberated, and bursting forth in song while shouting for joy. 14:7. Moreover, the sincere and honest, the pure and truthful who are upright and living, these cleansed and stately evergreen branches rejoice, because they are happy for you. The cedars of Lebanon are saying, from the time you became inactive no one has come up to cut us in. Yahowah 14:8. Yahowah has not changed, nor will he ever alter course. He has and will continually choose Israel over all others. They remain the chosen people, the family, nation, and race Yahowah loves above and beyond all others. They will benefit from his mercy. Sorry Christians, but Paul led you. And sadly, in spite of explicit warnings from God and overwhelming evidence to the contrary, you believed him. God did not change his mind or his approach and does not have a different message and plan for Gentiles. As a result, it is Gentiles, not Jews, who will be silenced, their nations destroyed by God. And those who demeaned his people will be demeaned in their presence. These things accomplished, the earth will be restored as a joyous home for Yahowah's family. While every covenant member will be celebrating, and the remnant of Israel will thrive, it appears as if Yahowah will also be buzzing in anticipation of welcoming the world's leaders to its eternal abode. Everyone seems to get what they want, even what they deserve. While inanimate objects such as this lightless prison are occasionally afforded a point of view as if they had a personality to illustrate a point, it is also possible that Sheol is really Shaul in this next statement. In that Sheol and Shaul are spelled identically in Hebrew, the reference might well be to the reaction of the infamous and deadly individual who was the principal author of the Christian New Testament, as well as the founder of the world's most popular Gentile religion, one based entirely on Babel. He will have influenced more of the political entities, religious institutions, and leaders at this time than everyone else combined. And there is no question that Shaul is in Sheol awaiting the arrival of his co-conspirators. But even if I'm wrong about the possibility that this may be speaking of Shaul in addition to Sheol, and thus serve as a further affirmation of this horrid man's influence on the souls he may now be welcoming into this prison, following the previous statement which identified the culprits headed this way, this is the worst possible news for world political and religious leaders. I would hate to think that hell is awaiting my arrival as it is theirs. This picture Yahowah has painted presents the ultimate contrast between right and wrong, good and bad. The decisions each of us make in this regard are unalterable and everlasting. Choose wisely between the things of God and the things of man. Open your eyes and mind and reject religion and politics in favor of Yahowah and his Torah. The overriding message here is that to be with Yahowah and participate in his covenant we must at some point disassociate ourselves from the nations and institutions those destined for Sheol have led. We cannot cleave to them and be accepted by God. The desire to be accepted, the decision to be accepting, the will to compromise and be tolerant, always leads to the same place. For the sake of your soul, take the unpopular path, the less trodden route, away from man into Yah. Experience what it means to be Kodesh, set apart. There is no benefit in having Sheol, or its most acclaimed convict, Shaul, welcome you. To the contrary, there is every reason to listen to Yahowah so that you can be among the few who are welcomed into his home. Sheol, Sheol, the place of abandonment, punishment, and questioning, the abode of no return in the realm of the dead, from Saul, to question someone and for them to be questioned, or Shaul, the failed King Saul and false prophet Paul, as the least desirable and most depressing alternative Mentasheth, from below, depicting that which is spatially beneath and inferior, also burdensome, is excited rogues, is all stirred up and roaring, agitated and anxious, trembling with anticipation to summon and meet you, announcing your arrival La'ada La'karboada, to welcome and greet you, calling you out by name while issuing and reciting an invitation for you to come, publicly proclaiming your entrance and inclusion. It has been alerted and is aroused to crush you or La'ada, it is incited to squash you, concentrating the utmost force to destroy the unjust and give false testimony all of the departed souls Kol Rephaim, every deceased individual having no material or physical substance, only consciousness of those who have been leaders and rulers of the authority figures and individuals obtaining high status of the earth Eretz, of the material realm. It raises up and establishes it confirms, validates, ratifies, encourages, and supports by means of their thrones and positions of power Menkais based upon their place of honor, all of Kol, every one of the leaders Melech, the rulers, the most persuasive, powerful, and important individuals who influence society, religion, government, and military, the authority figures or kings who demand submission and obedience, the heads of institutions whose directives subjects ponder and follow, from Malach, reigning source of counsel and advice who can raise the message people are compelled to follow of the Gentile nations Goyim, of the countries and people other than Yisrael. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:9. Somehow, this is what I've always anticipated. And yet, seeing it so clearly and universally stated, so unambiguously and undeniably, I'm at a loss for words. It's one thing to read Yahowah's testimony with an eye to making the proper connections so as to deduce the most reasonable conclusions, thereby anticipating that this would be the case and sharing those thoughts with a degree of caution and recognition of the fact that this undermines everything people have been led to believe. But considering that the soul of every world leader, whether they claimed religious, political, or military authority, is either currently incarcerated in Sheol or headed in that direction, this is among the most polarizing statements presented by God. It not only affirms that Paul lied when he wrote that all governments were established by God and should be obeyed in his overture to the Romans, it unravels the entire fabric of human history. There is no getting around this, no reprieve for Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Rome, the Church, or the leaders of any country or religious institution on earth. They are all going to hell. All means all, that is all means. Every empowered world leader is headed to Sheol to meet Shaul, the man who was paramount in establishing the union between religion and politics and who lied regarding God's position on these things. And should you question this conclusion, read his pathetic and goddamn drivel in 13th chapter of Romans. While accountability is always a good thing, there is another aspect of this which I find appealing. God cares about Gentiles too, and he is disappointed that their leadership has deprived so many of their rights and free will. But more than this, the fact that God is condemning Gentiles for what they have done puts all of this right back into Paul's lap, because he claimed them all for himself. They were his target audience, making the chosen people his adversaries. And make no mistake, it was Paul who inspired his people, Gentiles, to do horrible things to God's people. Moreover, since Paul admits to being demon-possessed at the conclusion of his second letter to the Corinthians, the association between Satan, and Goyim cannot be overlooked. Shaul's Sheol invitees will find their world upside down and disorienting. Removed from the world of the living, and in the midst of this rude awakening, they will ask the man who paved the broad path to hell. All of them call him, every one of them without exception from the great Isaiah scroll will respond Anna, will choose to reply through their debasement, humiliation and affliction call him perfect Joseph and say to you Ymrlada, and convey and declare to you, choosing to ask you, have you also become weak and afflicted Gamatachala, are you also grieving over having become diseased, riddled with anxiety over the emotional distress and mental anguish, impaired and worn out begging for intercession as well Pu'al perfect passive, the object suffers the effect of the afflictions just like we are Kainanu Elinanu, similar to what is happening to us, becoming like the proverb Mashal, likened unto the story you had conveyed as a living example of the parable Nifil perfect. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:10. They have gone from the penthouse to the outhouse and don't much like it. And since misery loves company, they are hoping that they are not alone. In that we learn by making connections. The last time we were told about this mashal, proverb, it was presented to depict Yahowah's desire for us to oppose the influence of government and religion, of those who, in conjunction with Babel, seek submission and obedience. When this occurs, the onslaught of the systematic promotion of mistaken beliefs will finally be abated. And while that declaration was just 5 statements ago, it bears repeating in this context. At this time you will lift up, accepting and raising this particular mashal, proverb, this comparative word picture told to illustrate an ethical point, to provide guidance, and to build character, and thereby facilitate good decision-making, against the ruler, in opposition to the one who influences and controls governments and religions, so that ye disapprove of the authority figure who seeks submission and obedience associated with Babel, confusion. And you will say, oh how the onslaught of the systematic and boisterous promotion of mistaken beliefs had ceased, the enticement into destructive and deadly behavior and quarrelsome dissension is over. In this way, and in the midst of these extraordinary circumstances, this exploitation, manipulation, and corruption has come to an end, as well as the abusive imposition of authority and the misuse of power, even the desire to govern, control, tax, and demand tribute has been abated by observing the Shabbat. 14:4. Therefore, the picture God is painting for us to see is one in which governmental imposition and religious authority are so egregious, all such leaders are going to be incarcerated in Sheol, without exception. Knowing this, recognizing that Yahowah stated it so unambiguously, what do you suppose God's reaction is going to be to those who believed them, or worse, who served with them? How is it that this statement has been available for the world to read, by the most acclaimed prophet in the midst of the most popular book ever written, and no one has noticed? Not a single person has bothered to explain the profound implications of this statement, one which completely undermines the authority while destroying the credibility of every religious and political institution on earth. and it is as if the religious institutions publishing Bible translations think that their customers are either so universally indoctrinated or overwhelmingly stupid that no one will figure it out and hold them accountable. It wasn't it neither. To prove my point, here are a variety of popular translations of Yahowah, Isaiah 14:9 for your consideration, all of which depict every world leader going to hell. While the translations vary from erroneous to egregious, there is no mistaking the message. New International Version: the realm of the dead below is all astir to meet you at your coming. It rouses the spirits of the departed to greet you, all those who were leaders in the world. It makes them rise from their thrones, all those who were kings over the nations.
New Living Translation: in the place of the dead there is excitement over your arrival. The spirits of world leaders and mighty kings long dead stand up to see you.
English Standard Version: Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who are leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who are kings of the nations.
New American Standard Bible: Sheol from beneath is excited over you to meet you when you come. It arouses for you the spirits of the dead, all the leaders of the earth. It raises all the kings of the nations from their thrones.
King James Version: Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations.
International Standard Version: the afterlife below is all astir to meet you when you arrive. It rouses up the spirits of the dead to greet you, everyone who used to be world leaders. It has raised up from their thrones all who used to be kings of the nations.
Why hasn't anyone brought this to the attention of the world's political and religious leaders, or more importantly, to their subjects and devotees? Nothing shows a greater dichotomy between God's way and man's ways as a universally upending of government. While rational readers over the centuries have recognized that the individual being addressed here isn't the king of Babylon, but instead the leader of confusion, for those who would claim otherwise, let's put that debate to rest. The king of Babylon during the time it was seized by Cyrus wasn't akin to a Mashal, proverb, in that fewer than 1 in 10 million even know his name, much less anything about him. While the research I presented in the previous chapter is readily available, had I not searched for it and shared what I discovered, I suspect you would know as little about him as I did prior to trying to solve the prophetic presentation we encountered. On the other hand, however, both Satan and Sheol are far better known than Yahowah, the world's primary object of worship over the past 6 millennia. The Lord Satan is the most revered individual in human history. And as we will learn in a moment, while Satan was cast down from heaven, no man has ever endured this particular fate. As we move to the next statement, there is a tendency in English Bibles to render Nebel as harp, and thus suggest that maggots are somehow musically inclined and prone to spread out and form a bed when they hear the nocturnal notes of the elegant stringed instrument. But in reality, Nebel is just one of many Hebrew words for implement, this one used to depict instruments which are outrageously disgraceful and foolish, contemptible and defiant. And while there are neither maggots nor worms in Sheol, suffice it to say, a bed of flesh-eating, garbage-devouring, slithering and squirming grubs paints an unappealing mental picture for someone who has considered himself extraordinarily dignified and beautiful. Speaking to Satan, while mocking his preoccupation with grandiose titles, Yahowah declares, "Your arrogance, unwarranted status, and desire to rise above, your majesty Gonada, your splendor and self-exaltation, along with your personal glorification, your conceited attitude and lack of morality, your grating and agitating behavior, and your propensity to blow smoke, your highness, from God, desire to be lifted up and rise over others has brought you down Yarad, precipitated your descent, causing you to be taken down, prostrated and subjugated to Sheol, the realm of the dead Sheol, to the place of everlasting abandonment, estrangement, incarceration, punishment, and questioning, the abode of no return, from Saul, to question someone and for them to be questioned, indistinguishable from Sheol, the failed King Saul and false prophet Paul, and at the boisterous and disquieting sound Wahahemyah, so then at the tumultuous and mourning cry of the riotous multitudes, at the clamorous, confusing, and disturbing growl of uproarious discord, from Hema, to murmur, growl, and roar in a clamorous and tumultuous cry from the great Isaiah scroll of your disgraceful and foolish implements Nebeliah, your wicked, immoral, and defiant standards, your outrageously disgraceful and contemptible instruments, maggots Rima, the squirming larvae of flies, annoying flesh-devouring insects which feed on rotting garbage, from Rim, to be exalted and lifted up, praised or worshipped will be spread out as a bed Yatzah, will be strewn out as a bedspread and wild worms Toliah, creeping and squirming bloody purple grubs which consume organic matter, from Yalla, to speak rashly, swallowing and devouring wildly inaccurate accusations shall become your covers Makachiyata, will blanket you as a garment from the great Isaiah scroll. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:11. Sheol was created for Satan and the misaligned Malak associated with him. As spiritual beings, they cannot be killed nor destroyed. But as light, they can be incarcerated in something akin to a black hole, and thus kept from interfering with Yahowah's plans forevermore. That is why this lesser light, this dark and demented spirit, was cast down. I suspect that the wicked and immortal implements in this case will be the Malak, spiritual implements who rebelled along with Satan. They are going to turn on him eventually for having subjected them to Sheol when they could have spent an eternity in heaven. We are about to discover the adversary's name, and it isn't Lucifer. If you are a Bible-believing Christian, you should be asking yourself why those who have published your Bibles and who have preached from them have universally and deliberately misled you regarding his designation and ambition. Satan's name is important because it reveals a treasure trove of information about him. What follows can only be said of a spiritual being. No man or woman has ever been cast out of heaven. Many have been invited, some as prophets to report on what they experienced, and others as part of their inheritance as a participant in the covenant, and while both are free to come and go as they please, that is a far cry from being cast down and out. You have fallen and have been cast down Nathal, you have gone from a higher position to a lower one, you have been sent down and are inferior as a result of your contempt, allotted and allocated to the earth below, dividing up the refuse and carcasses, cut down, downcast, and falling prostrate in worship for having failed in your attack, ruined and estranged, banished from the association as part of an abortion or miscarriage for men, out of and away from the spiritual abode Hashamim, the heavens, the spiritual realm, the home of God the is from the great Isaiah scroll Hylel ben Chaka, brightly shining son of darkness Hylel ben Chaka, the flashy and boastful child of the east, the blackness of the shining one, the ostentatious and boastful show-off comprised of light predisposed to mislead and make others appear foolish as a descendant of a dark, black, and gloomy place in the east predicated upon the rising sun and morning star, wailing and howling over the scheme he has conjured to satiate his longings. You have been cut down, cast down, and have been disassociated Gada, you have been felled and have fallen, destroyed and cut off, and you will be silenced and subjected to enormous pressure, sent down and away to the earth Laha Eretz, to the material realm. Yul is weakening, prostrating, and vanquishing Chalash, Yul is overcoming and defeating the powerless and dying, disabling the weak who bow down in close association with and upon all the Gentile nations Gawim, ethnic and geopolitical groups outside of Israel, Gentiles, people acting as if they were animals singular in the great Isaiah scroll and plural in Masoretic text and Septuagint. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:12. There are several, equally appropriate ways to translate Hylel ben Chaka, all of which are revealing brightly shining son of darkness, flashy and boastful child of the east, or even blackness of the shining one. His name indicates that he is an ostentatious and boastful show-off comprised of light predisposed to mislead and make others appear foolish. Satan is a descendant of a dark, black, and gloomy place in the east predicated upon the rising sun and morning star, who is known for wailing and howling over the scheme he has conjured to satiate his longings. Beyond its primary definition, which confirms that Satan is a spiritual being and thus comprised of light, shining brightly, as a light-bearing object, Hylel, the actionable root of Hylel, describes his flashy nature, arrogant attitude, and boastful assertions. The final three attributes, flashy, arrogant, and boastful, make him the opposite of God. Yahowah never shows off. He is consistently modest and inconspicuous, habitually understated while constantly over-delivering. It is an aspect of his personality which makes him approachable, easy and comfortable to be around. Frankly, as the creator of the universe, the author of life, and the inspiration behind the Torah, it would be impossible for Yahowah to be arrogant. There is no way to overvaluate these achievements and no accolades capable of overstating the prowess of God. More importantly, his commitment to sacrificial love, to serving his children by getting down on his knees, to diminishing an aspect of his nature, all to lift us up defines the Almighty as the antithesis of the adversary. His entire purpose is to make us great, not for us to praise him. Affirming this, Yahowah never asks us to worship him. Since boasts fall into the categories of either overstating one's relative importance in comparison to another or to making an assertion beyond one's capacity to deliver, Yahowah cannot boast. As we dig deeper into the insights Hylel provides into Satan's nature, we find that such an individual is predisposed to mislead while making others appear foolish. Hylel defines this propensity as a malady and as madness. On the positive side, and since light has many beneficial attributes, Hylel can be used to convey the idea of praiseworthy illumination and to express our desire to radiate the light of God. In the renowned exclamation, Hallelujah, it expresses our desire to radiate Yahowah's light, shining brightly in Yah's presence while declaring his light worthy. But one thing is for sure, Hylel cannot rationally nor responsibly be translated nor transliterated Lucifer or morning star. Shining One is an acceptable translation, but as a name, the only correct way to treat Hylel is to transliterate it, replicating the sound of his personal and proper designation in the alphabet of another language. Beyond this, in a subsequent discussion or within parenthesis following Hylel, the basis of the name and its potential meanings can be conveyed. There is no dispute that Hylel is based upon the verb, hulal, to shine, but it may also be marginally influenced by Yael, meaning to howl like a beast, to wail and lament, to hallucinate and mock. This verb is used in Yahowah, Joel 1:5 to suggest that we are prone to say foolish things when we are intoxicated with the new wine of the New Testament's Eucharist and communion. Wake up those of you who are inebriated, those of you who wail and howl, all of you who are intoxicated with new wine, and keep it away from your mouth. Yahowah, Joel 1:11 tells those who farm the fields and dress the vines to wail over the fact that there is no barley to harvest, and thus a dearth of saved souls. Similarly, 1:13 uses Yael to tell the priests and ministers to lament over the realization that the wine and lamb of Passover are being withheld. Then in Micah 1:8, the prophet says that he will howl like the serpents. Also relevant, Yael was used in Isaiah 13:6 wail and howl Yael, cry out and shout out a warning, expressing a woe to be heard in desolate places, for the day of Yahowah is approaching. This brings us to the rest of Satan's name. He has been Chaka, son of the rising sun, son of the dawn, or child of the east, thereby addressing Babylon. Written the same way in the Hebrew text, but pointed differently by the Masoretes, Shahar also means to be black, to blacken, to be swarthy, dark, foreboding, and, or weather-beaten, making Hylel the son of darkness. In this case, the contrast and duplicity between shining brightly so as to appear as a source of enlightenment to some and divine to others, while actually being the son of darkness, provides an especially insightful and apt depiction of Satan's conflicted nature, character, and tactics whereby the adversary seeks to be known as God. Even the weather-beaten aspects of Shahar are telling, because the heads of most pagan pantheons are weather gods. Moreover, Hylel ben Chaka is called the prince and power of the air. Furthermore, as a verb, Shahar speaks of strongly desiring something and being willing to conjure up a scheme to achieve that longing. If nothing else, Satan has been motivated, devoting all of his energies over the past 6,000 years to achieving his goal: the deception, depredation, degradation, debasement, death, and damnation of humankind. And as we learned in the tale of the Assyrian, he is either unaware or will not accept the fact that he loses in the end, as does every soul he takes with him into Sheol. Therefore, Hylel ben Chaka is the brightly shining son of darkness, and the flashy and boastful child of the east. His character, motivations, and approach are further illustrated as the ostentatious and boastful show-off comprised of light predisposed to mislead while making others appear foolish, as a descendant of a dark, black, and gloomy place in the east which is focused upon the rising sun and morning star, wailing and howling over the scheme he has conjured to satiate his longings. As we ponder the implications of the statement following the presentation of Satan's name, we come to realize that this was assuredly describing the plight of a spiritual being and not a material individual. He has been cast out of heaven into the earth. And now that he has been disassociated from Yahowah, he is going about his business, the degradation and subjugation of humankind, especially Gentiles, by way of the leaders of their nations. By encouraging them to be religious, by requiring that they bow down and prostrate themselves, by insisting that they support their country and its military, he is weakening them. But do not think that Satan's target audience is Gentiles, because I'm convinced that would be a mistake, and it's not what this statement is implying. This actually seems to convey that Satan is associating with Gentiles politically and religiously because he wants to use them. And if that is the case, by process of elimination, he would be inspiring Gentiles to harass Jews. Now that we know who Satan actually is, what has happened to him, and what he is doing, Yahowah is affording us the opportunity to listen to what he has to say. Apart from the things of God, this candid declaration may be among the most revealing and relevant statements ever made. It explains how Satan operates and where we should expect to find him. Because Wah, and you oughta, yourself, said Amar, boasted and declared, expressed in words, intended, and mentioned Kal perfect and by your judgment in Korla Babada, that perspective and ambition you have taken to heart, the inclination and resolution of your inner nature, the ambition and determination of your being, your understanding, passion, and desire, from Lubab, to ravish, overwhelm, and overpower, to become intelligent and offer enlightenment, and to encourage an emotional response. I will ascend, overcome, and be exalted in law, I will rise above and be lifted up, I will be presented as superior and worshipped, offered up in engendering sacrifices, even as Allah Kalam perfect active in the spiritual realm in heaven Hashamim, among the stars in the sky and the abode of God, more than and above Min Malalat, ascending upward beyond, greater than the luminous personification and brilliant progeny Kaukab, the omniscience and the stars, the highest places, the brightest lights and heavenly powers of God of the Almighty. I will raise room, I will lift up and triumph in rebellion, magnifying Hifil and perfect my throne Kaisini, my seat of power, authority, and honor, my place to influence and rule, related to Kaka, ability to conceal one's true identity, hiding the information needed to understand, covering over and clothing oneself in a way which is misleading. I will establish a dwelling place Yahowah, I will settle upon and inhabit, abiding and remaining, creating a place for people to approach and meet Hylel perfect on the mount of the appointed meetings Bahar mode, in conjunction with the mountains and ridgeline of the designated and authorized times to meet for the celebratory feasts, from Yad, to appoint and designate, to set and fix, to gather for a betrothal ceremony in association with Ba the northern summit Yarak Azaphon, the remote area and distant place associated with the north wind or left hand, on the side and flank of where the Canaanite gods lived, below, from Yarak, base and procreative power and Zoftan, to lurk and hide one's actual value from discovery. 14:13. I will ascend Allah, I will rise above and be lifted up, drawing a following and overcome, seen as superior as Allah Hylel perfect above all, over the heights Bama, elevated places of worship, the lofty shrines and cultic platforms of pagan religious devotion of the clouds obscuring phenomenon which conceals heavenly objects from view. I will on my own initiative make myself appear as if I were Dhamma, I will do whatever is necessary to be considered as, correspond to, and be the equivalent of, without any assistance I will consistently resemble and continually be comparable to, and on an ongoing basis I will be seen in the likeness of Hit Pale and Perfect, without any outside help or interference, on one's own initiative and based solely on their ability and actions without any outside influence on a continual and habitual ongoing basis the Most High Eliod, representing the approach of the one true God, the same as the Supreme Being, greater and higher than the Almighty, inspiring awe, fear, and devotion with the splendor and status of God, from Elohim and Allah, Allah as God or more precisely Allahu Akbar. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:14. There are 5 satanic declarations here, the last one being the most revealing. 5 is the number of confusion, and thus of Satan. Affirming this his most recognizable sign is the 5-pointed star, rotated to symbolize the head of a goat. In the order of things, 5, confusion stands between 4, a time of fulfillment, and 6, the number of man. And should you be curious, 1 is the number of God. 2 represents choice. 3 is the number of family. And 7 is perfection. So let's evaluate these statements one at a time. First, I will ascend, overcome, and be exalted in Allah, I will rise above and be lifted up, I will be presented as superior and worshipped, offered up in engendering sacrifices even as Allah Hylel perfect active in the spiritual realm in heaven Hashamim, among the stars in the sky and the abode of God, more than and above men Allah, ascending upward beyond, greater than the luminous personification and brilliant progeny Kaukab, the omniscience in the stars, the highest places, the brightest lights and heavenly powers of God of the Almighty. This is consistent with Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater, and with the notion of the Lord God, whereby Satan wants to be seen as greater than Yahowah and actually lording over him. His intent is to be seen as the greatest in heaven, the most brilliant star in the sky, and as the most enlightened. This is a statement I have most often cited when discussing Satan's ambition, which is to be exalted, and therefore, worshipped, over and above Yahowah. It reveals that Satan wants to ascend away from the lowly adversary title to the lofty status of the Almighty. The only problem with this idea is that if it stood alone and became widely known, it actually creates a problem for Hylel bin Shaka in that it suggests that there are 2 gods, one greater than the other. While that wouldn't have been an issue for pagans, it's a serious conundrum for rational monotheists. Rather than one supreme being, there would have to be 2 or more competing deities in heaven. I say this because Satan's assertion is that he wants to rise above, overcome, and be greater than God rather than simply be the one and only God. This is a problem inherent in Allahu Akbar, one that 1.5 billion Muslims are content to ignore. And yet I always ask them greater than whom? For which they have no answer. Second, I will raise Rub, I will lift up and triumph in rebellion, magnifying Hifil and perfect my throne Kaisini, my seat of power, authority, and honor, my place to influence and rule, related to Kaka, ability to conceal one's true identity, hiding the information needed to understand, covering over and clothing oneself in a way which is misleading. As a spiritual implement, Satan does not have a throne of his own, but he shares one with many. The idea that he wants to raise his seat of honor, enhance his authority, and increase his power suggests that this seat must coincide with those occupied by kings, presidents, popes, prime ministers and the like. This is all about wielding absolute power, claiming the utmost authority, and seeking acclaim. Also interesting, Kais conveys more than throne. It infers the obvious, that Satan wants to hide his true identity, concealing the fact that he is the adversary, so that he can mislead almost everyone, fooling them into worshipping him as if he were a god. In reality, men like Paul and Muhammad have dressed the devil up, sung his praises, and presented him as the object of religious devotion. Third, I will establish a dwelling place Yahowah, I will settle upon and inhabit, abiding and remaining, creating a place for people to approach and meet Kal Imperfect on the Mount of the Appointed Meetings Bahar Mode, in conjunction with the mountains and ridgeline of the designated and authorized times to meet for the celebratory feasts, from Yad, to appoint and designate, to set and fix, to gather for a betrothal ceremony in association with Ba the northern summit Yarak Azaphon, the remote area and distant place associated with the north wind or left hand, on the side and flank of where the Canaanite gods lived, below, from Yarak, base and procreative power and Zoftan, to lurk and hide one's actual value from discovery. First and foremost, this affirms that I was right. Satan's intent has been to use Gentiles to harass Jews. This is what made Shaul and his oracles his Lord's perfect apostle and prophet. Rome would be nice if you thrived on the ruins of failed empires, and Mecca would be grand if ignorance and desolation were your thing, but when it comes to being perceived as God, it's all downhill from Moriah. Satan would have his religious minions build the gaudiest golden dome shrine right on top of the Temple Mount, head bypass Daud's home on the southernmost ridgeline, and build the ultimate trophy in his perceived competition on the northern edge of the Mount of the Appointed Meetings, as close as possible to where Yahusha fulfilled Passover and Abraham affirmed the covenant. As one would expect with a rebuffed adversary, Hylel bin Shakai is ridiculously competitive and will do anything to prevail. The Dome of the Rock was his greatest achievement. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, beneath it, is second only to it. Fourth, I will ascend Allah, I will rise above and be lifted up, drawing a following and overcome, seen as superior as Allah Kal Imperfect above Al, over the heights Bama, elevated places of worship, the lofty shrines and cultic platforms of pagan religious devotion of the clouds obscuring phenomenon which conceals heavenly objects from view. This is Satan's way of saying that he is bigger, more powerful, and more important than anything God created on earth, including man. He could also be suggesting that he intends to position himself such that he occludes and obscures God's light, limiting what people below him know and see. That brings us to the most revealing statement of all, one so extraordinary, it alone has made our journey worthwhile. Fifth, I will on my own initiative make myself appear as if I were Dhamma, I will do whatever is necessary to be considered as, correspond to, and be the equivalent of. Without any assistance I will consistently resemble and continually be comparable to, and on an ongoing basis I will be seen in the likeness of Kal Imperfect, without any outside help or interference, on one's own initiative and based solely on their ability and actions without any outside influence on a continual and habitual ongoing basis. The Most High Elion, representing the approach of the one true God, the same as the Supreme Being, greater and higher than the Almighty, inspiring awe, fear, and devotion with the splendor and status of God, from Elohim and Allah. Allah as God, or more precisely Allahu Akbar. I do not know how this could be any clearer. Cognizant of this statement, knowing that it is authentic, and that it has been transmitted to us accurately, it's blatantly obvious that Satan's primary desire is to appear as if he were God. His ambition is to be the Lord of religion, all of them. It is so unambiguous, I am bewildered as to why no one else understands this. The world has been beguiled into believing so many things which are untrue, and this is paramount among them. Satan does not want to be Satan, the adversary, but instead God Almighty. He has no interest in Satan worship, the occult, seances, Luciferian societies, or any other such small-time and derogatory insults. He does not want to be known as the adversary, period. He is Allah in Islam, the Lord God in Christianity, Hashem in Judaism. Heck, has closer to the Christian depiction of Jesus Christ than is Yahowah. Hylel bin Shakai is the universal God of governments and of the troop-loving God of militaries, especially the amalgamized and generic God of most societies. And he doesn't care what you call him so long as it isn't the adversary, Satan, including Baal, the Lord, God, Almighty, Jesus, Christ, Allah, Zeus, Dionysus, the greater power, Queen of Heaven, Mother of God, or even Mother Nature. But it is all bluster and bravado. Hes the snake a Chael, not the father of Shamaim. Hes lie, not the truth, a reflection, not the light. He was created, and is neither creative nor the creator. Yahowah made him to be a tool, one now that is irreparably damaged. And so of his fate, Yahowah says, and yet surely okay, but indeed, as a matter of emphasis, immediately after the conclusion of an upcoming and subsequent period of time to towards, in the direction of, into, and inside Sheol, the realm of the dead Sheol, place of exile, abandonment, punishment, and questioning, the abode of no return, the wasteland and void, from Saul, to question and to be questioned, to beg and to be given what has been requested and is required, indistinguishable from Shaul, the failed King Saul and false prophet Paul. You are being forced down Yarad, you are brought down, compelled and having no say in the matter, descending not of your own accord. Hafal imperfect, the subject, Hylel bin Shaka, is being acted upon, is devoid of free will, and is compelled by force to descend just as the object, Sheol, is obligated to receive him forever, to El, unto and towards the remoteness Yarika, the distant border of space and time, to the far extremity of the prison boret, of the dungeon of depression, the sepulchre and pit, from above, to make clear, to declare, explain, and to be given proof. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:15. He had a good run. He became the most popular, praised, and worshipped being in the whole of the human experience. No one has amassed more devotees or followers. Countless religious edifices have been erected in his honor. Thousands of armies have marched to his cadence. And hundreds of governments have sworn an oath of allegiance to him. His influence is unsurpassed. His scriptures have sculpted our world. And in the end, people have chosen him over Yahowah by 1,000,000 or more to 1. Sheol is therefore a prison designed to incarcerate spiritual, and thus immortal beings comprised of light. It is remote and depressing, a dark dungeon, from which there will be no escape. But he will be disrobed, unmasked, and dimmed. The spirit who sought to be God will forever be the adversary. Those who look at you Ra'ad and Elada, those who see you and those who are shown who you are will stare Shaga, will look intently, observing closely so as to become better informed Hifil and perfect in your direction Elada, at you, trying to understand Ben, seeking to make the connections needed to comprehend, apprehending the information to consider imperfect this Zay, such things in these matters, the one who hide, the individual or entity who from the great Isaiah scroll caused the earth to be agitated, astonished, and angry because he was perturbed Ragas Ha'eretz, who shook up, provoked, and anguished the material realm, who became enraged in the land creating instability and turmoil Hifil active by swaying and invoking fear within Ras, by creating discord and rattling, creating commotion and chaos, thereby ruining and destroying empires and governments Mamlaka, kingdoms and geopolitical realms, world leaders, those who claim the authority to rule. 14:16 The one who Aish, the individual or entity who from the great Isaiah scroll caused Hatim, the one who is responsible for and made Kal perfect the world Tabal, the planet, earth, every locale where people live to be a lifeless place without the word Midbar, a barren wasteland and uninhabited wilderness where the declaration and promises are not considered, a compound of Ma, to seek answers by asking who, what, where, why, when, and how questions about Dabar, the word, who overthrew Iraq, who caused the downfall of upbeating and pulling down, plucking away, annihilating and ruining Kal perfect its anxious and anguished inhabitants of Hu, its terrorized and fearful villages, towns, and cities. His captives are bound to him Asir Hu, those he holds in detention, his prisoners, those who are tied and obligated to him, who have sworn an oath to him, from Akkar, to be imprisoned and bound as a result of one's oaths, allegiances, vows, and obligations and are never free to go low paths, are never open-minded regarding the revelation, are unable to respond to that which has been inscribed in writing, are never released from bondage, and cannot pass through the open door of Holmbeth, as part of the household and family of the covenant. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:17. Fear is the devil's intoxicant. Without it, he would have failed miserably. People are afraid to take a stand against the established majority, afraid to die, afraid of what might come after death, afraid of the illusion of hell. Satan preys on these fears, and the easiest place to disseminate fear is within government. They possess the ability to imprison and kill those who rebel. And even those who submit to their authority are goaded into relinquishing their sons, their funds, and their freedoms to keep all manner of concocted adversaries at bay. They not only enact the laws, they prosecute them, taxing the individual for the right to control them. And while that's all sad but true, it's the next phrase that got my attention. Hylel bin Shaka, the flashy and boastful child of the East, is the one who caused and is responsible for the world, the entire planet, to be a lifeless place without the word. Satan's ambition wasn't regional, limited to Babylon and Assyria, but instead for the entire world. And there is only one human institution with worldwide influence: religion. The institutions of many words are midbar, lifeless places without the word of God, places where his promises are not considered. It is also telling that an alliance with Hylel bin Shaka is the one-way street to Sheol. There is no going home, turning around, or going back. Those who have allied with him to further their ambitions are never free to go. After all, there is a reason Satan is best known as the Lord. One of the many reasons that there is no way out once lured in, is because such individuals are shut off from Yahowah. Trapped in Babylon, driven by politics or religion, they are expressly excluded from the covenant. Further, the egos of societal leaders lock them into a mindset and perspective which precludes them from responding to the truth, even if they were to stumble upon it. The kind of open mind needed to understand Yahowah's message requires more than a willingness to listen. To know God, we must be receptive, willing to adjust our thinking and perspective so that it aligns with His. It is one thing to be open to what Yahowah has to say, and another entirely to be willing to go where His words lead. Many of the world's most extravagant monuments are actually tombs, the pyramids in Egypt being chief among them. But even in more modern times, shrines have been erected to the dead. Consider the Lincoln Monument, Washington's obelisk, Jefferson's Shrine, the eternal flame at JFK's gravesite, or the glistening granite of Lenin's tomb, as examples. Every one of Cole, all of the rulers Melech, the leaders, the heads of government, the political, social, religious, and military authority figures of the Gentiles and their nations Goyim, of the ethnicities distinct and estranged from Yisrael, the geopolitical associations of people who act on their animal and religious instincts plural in the great Isaiah scroll, all of them Kol Ham, each and every one of them repetition not included in the great Isaiah scroll, has been laid to rest Jacob, is horizontal, laying down glorified and honored Kabod, manifesting their power and surrounded by their possessions, wealthy and rewarded, even with splendor and riches, each individual each in his own household, temple, or tomb Babithu, within his own clan or dynasty, palace or temple, family lineage and ancestors. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:18. Then speaking of Hylel ben Shaka, Yahowah says, "But you Ma'ada, yourself, are cast out Shalak, you are thrown out and hurled away awful perfect from in the tomb of your death Kebarata, your sepulchre and burial, being buried, and from the spectre of dying like Ka, similar to and in the manner of a loathed, rejected, and degraded Tob, and abhorred and despised, vile and repulsive, abominable and desecrated offshoot Netzer, secondary or tertiary branch, shoot, scion, graft, implant, or twig, clothed wearing lapuj, adorned and covered with the slain and slaughtered hag, those intentionally murdered and viciously killed, those pierced on, those struck with the sword cherub, with the weapons of war, descending Yarad, bowing down, prostrating oneself, going down, being subjugated and abandoned to El, towards the depressed prison Bor, the dungeon, sepulchre, and pit Abin, stones from the Masoretic text isn't in the great Isaiah scroll to Ka, like a corpse pegger, a carcass, a dead corporeal body or lifeless idol rambled down boo, pressured and dominated, loathed and trodden down, kicked about and floundering, desecrated and rejected. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:19. Yahowah is the author of life while Satan is the plague of death. It is hard to imagine how many men, women, and children he is ultimately responsible for having killed. But in the end, he will wear their pain and be stained by their blood. It is a burden he will bear in the lightless prison of Sheol. He will not suffer alone, however. Those he corrupted and destroyed will join him, as will many of the soldiers and militants who fought and killed singing his praises. But you'll notice, most if not all of the world leaders Hylel ben Shaka has influenced over the years will arrive before him. This suggests that Satan will be allowed to roam the earth, twisting and corrupting Yahowah's message in order to be worshipped in his stead, until the last possible moment. You will not join them at the same time Lo Yokad, you will not be united with them at once, but during another period of time, failing to reciprocate all at once with them Ethem and burial Ba Habura, in the grave, entombed in a sepulchre because for the reason that your realm Eretzada, your land, region, and material realm you have corrupted and destroyed Shasheth, you have perverted, sullied, spoiled, and ruined, confounded and devastated, turning it into a slime pit, a putrid swamp of decay, a dungeon and cesspool for the decomposing. Your compatriots and followers Amada, your people and nations, family and kin, countries and armies, associates and cultures you have intentionally slaughtered and viciously slain her egg, you have murdered. These offspring Zerah, descendants and progenies, children and posterity of evil Ra, of those who are deliberately harmful and wrong, in wicked opposition, displeasing and noxious will never be invited nor called out, remaining unwelcome Lokara, they will not be received nor be present, neither acknowledged nor encountered, and therefore never met with while becoming completely unknown for all eternity La Olam, forevermore, for an unlimited duration of time. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:20. The offspring of evil eternally precluded from receiving the benefits of the Migrae, and thus excluded from heaven and ever-knowing God, are Satan's compatriots, those he corrupted, those who fought and died for him. As such, the myth that God wants to save everyone has been shattered. Moreover, we now know that hell will be a very crowded and popular place. We entered this discussion expecting to learn more about the adversary, anticipating that his association with Babylon and the confusing intermixing within the Lord's Bible would be confirmed and explained. And while our expectations have been met, even exceeded, there have been some surprises. There were aspects of Satan's name, Hylel ben Shaka, the brilliant son of darkness and the arrogance originating out of the east, that I had been previously unaware. I had also thought that the text would affirm that Satan wanted to be greater than God, which would place Hylel ben Shaka above Yahowah and pagan pantheons. And while I interpreted this as him wanting to be worshipped as God rather than known as the adversary, Satan actually stated this outright, affirming one of the most important early conclusions I had drawn while drafting Prophet of Doom. It revealed that I had been correct in seeing the adversary as the Lord God of Christianity and as Allah in Islam. Yahowah's presentation of this world-altering conversation unambiguously associates Satan with the world's political and religious leaders, and it holds him accountable for the countless men and women they have conspired to slaughter. As such, it was truly gratifying to see one of my most controversial insights validated in Yahowah's prophetic witness. Also surprising was the role Hylel appeared to play in all of this. It was presented as calling out to Hylel bin Shaka, giddy with anticipation of reuniting with and welcoming Satan. But how could that be? Prisons are not imbued with personalities. As such, we were led to see Shaw greeting Satan and Hylel as he arrives. Now, once again, here's one of the most relevant and provocative eyewitness accounts Yahowah has made available to us. Sheol, the realm of the dead and place of abandonment, punishment, and questioning, the abode of no return, the least desirable and most depressing alternative, and also Shaw, as the plague of death, are excited and anxious, trembling with anticipation to summon and meet you, announcing your arrival, calling you out by name while issuing and reciting an invitation for you to come, publicly proclaiming your entrance and inclusion, welcoming you. It has been alerted and is aroused to crush the unjust and give false testimony, including all of the departed souls who have been leaders and rulers, authority figures obtaining a high status, of the earth. It raises up and establishes, validates and encourages, by means of their thrones and positions of power, all of the leaders and rulers, every one of the most persuasive, powerful, and important individuals who influence society, religious, government, and military leaders, including all of the authority figures and kings who demand submission and obedience, even the heads of institutions whose directives subjects follow, of the Gentile nations outside of Israel. 14. 9. All of them without exception will answer and reply in the midst of their debasement, humiliation, and affliction, and they will say to you, asking you, have you also become weak and afflicted, grieved over having become diseased, riddled with anxiety over the mental anguish, just like we are, becoming like the proverb, likened unto the story you had conveyed as a living example of this parable? 14. 10. Your arrogance, unwarranted status, and desire to rise above, your self-exaltation along with your personal glorification and lack of morality, your grating and agitating behavior, and your propensity to blow smoke, has brought you down, precipitating your descent to Sheol, the realm of the dead, place of everlasting abandonment, estrangement, incarceration, and to Shaul, the false prophet known as Paul. At the boisterous and disquieting sound of the riotous multitudes and the confusing and disturbing growl of the uproarious discord of your disgraceful and foolish implements, maggots will be spread out as a bed and worms, swallowing and devouring wildly inaccurate accusations, shall become your covers. 14. 11. You have fallen and have been cast down from the spiritual abode of God, Hylel bin Shaka, brightly shining son of darkness and flashy and boastful child of the east, the blackness of the shining one, the ostentatious and boastful show-off comprised of light predisposed to mislead who makes others appear foolish and is a descendant of a dark and gloomy place in the east predicated upon the rising sun and morning star, crying out a scheme he has conjured to satiate his longings. You have been cast down and disassociated, cut off and silenced, then subjected to enormous pressure, sent down to the earth in the material realm. Yahowah is weakening, prostrating, and vanquishing the nations, disabling the weak who bow down in close association with the Gentiles, ethnicities and geopolitical groups outside of Israel. 14. 12. Because you, yourself, said, boasted and declared, in your judgment and core, your perspective and ambition, in the inclination and resolution of your inner nature, your ambition and determination, even your desire to ravish and overpower, offer enlightenment, and encourage an emotional response, I will be lifted up and be presented as superior and worshipped, engendering sacrifices, even as Allah among the stars in the sky and the abode of God. I will ascend and be exalted by rising above the luminous personification and brilliant progeny of God Almighty. I will raise in triumph and in rebellion, magnifying my throne, my seat of power, authority, and honor, my place to influence and rule, all while continuing to conceal my true identity, hiding the information needed to understand. And I will establish a dwelling, creating a place for people to approach on the mount of the appointed meetings in association with the northern summit, the remote area and distant place associated with the north wind where the Canaanite gods lived, lurking to hide my actual merit from discovery. 14. 13. I will ascend and be lifted up, drawing a following, and I will be seen as superior, even as Allah above the heights and elevated places of worship, the lofty shrines and cultic platforms of pagan religious devotion of the clouds and obscuring phenomenon which conceals heavenly objects from view. I will on my own initiative make myself appear as if I were, doing whatever is necessary to be considered as the equivalent of the Most High, the Supreme Being, greater and higher than the Almighty, inspiring awe, fear, and devotion. 14. 14. And yet surely, immediately after the conclusion of an upcoming and subsequent period of time, unto Sheol, the realm of the dead, place of everlasting abandonment, estrangement, incarceration, and punishment, of questioning and no return, and of Sheol, the false prophet known as Paul, you are being forced down and compelled, having no say in the matter, and unto the remoteness, the distant border of space and time, to the far extremity of the lightless prison. 14, 15. Those who are shown who you really are will stare, intently observing so as to become better informed about your direction and destination, trying to understand, seeking to make the connections needed to comprehend such things as these regarding the individual who caused the earth to be agitated, astonished, and angry just because he was perturbed, creating instability and turmoil by swaying and invoking fear, by creating discord and chaos, so as to destroy empires and governments, world leaders and those who claim the authority to rule. 14, 16. The one who is responsible for making the world a lifeless place without understanding the word, and who overthrew, pulling down, plucking away, and annihilating its anxious and anguished inhabitants, his captives who are bound to him, those who are associated with him and obligated to him, who have sworn an oath to him are never free to go, they are never open-minded regarding the revelation, they are unable to respond to that which has been inscribed in writing, and are never released from bondage, and thus unable to pass through the open door of the home and be part of the household and family of the covenant. 14, 17. Every one of the rulers, the leaders, heads of government, political, social, religious, and military authority figures of the Gentiles in their nations who act on their animal and religious instincts, each and every one of them has been laid to rest glorified and honored, surrounded by their possessions, wealthy and rewarded, each individual in his own household, temple, or a tomb. 14, 18. But you, yourself, are cast out, thrown out and hurled away from the tomb, and the specter of you dying like loathed, rejected, and degraded, abhorred and despised offshoot, clothed in death with those intentionally slaughtered and slain who were violently and viciously killed, those pierced with the sword and weapons of war, descending, bowing down, and prostrating oneself, abandoned in the lightless and depressed prison akin to a corpse trampled down, pressured and dominated, loathed and floundering, desecrated and rejected. 14, 19. You will not join them at the same time, but during another period of time, failing to reciprocate all at once with them in burial, because your realm you have corrupted and destroyed, you have perverted, sullied, and spoiled, confounded and devastated, turning your world in the material realm into a slime pit, a putrid swamp of decay, a dungeon and cesspool for the decomposing. Your compatriots and followers, your people and nations, you have intentionally slaughtered and viciously slain. These offspring of evil, of those who are deliberately harmful and wrong in wicked opposition, will never be invited nor called out, remaining unwelcome for all eternity and unknown in the hereafter. Yahowah 14, 20. It all boils down to two profound and all-encompassing realizations, both of which are the antithesis of what 99.9999% of people have been led to believe. First, Satan is the Lord God of religion, especially in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. He is the individual the faithful praise and worship, and to him they bow. And second, every world leader, past and present, secular and sectarian, has been influenced by Satan and will endure his fate. They are all destined for Sheol. Satan is evil, but he is not ill-informed, especially about Yahowah. If mere mortals such as ourselves have been able to figure out the timing of Yahowah's return, it's certain that Hylel ben Chaka knows it as well. He is aware that his final showdown with Yahowah will conclude on Yom Kippurim in the fall of 2033. If it were a numbers game, it would be an annihilation, because Satan is vastly more popular than God. But because it's not a numbers game, because Yahweh is more concerned with who and why than how many, there will be an annihilation, as billions of souls who chose poorly will lose their lives. By almost any measure man would use, Satan has overachieved throughout his tenure as the adversary, celebrating the carnage which resulted from his influence over Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, Imperial Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, as well as all things Islam, the Nazis, Soviet Russia, Communist China, and America. And yet, his crowning achievements will transpire over the next 15 years, between 2018 and October 2, 2033. The thing Satan does best, deception and death through religious commingling and political duplicity, will become so rampant, if Yahowah were not to intervene, freedom would be completely eradicated and life would be extinguished on the planet Earth. Now, therefore, is the time for righteous indignation, for hating those who would destroy that which Yahowah loves, devastating the planet beyond repair. It is time to hold the world's leaders accountable, making it as difficult as possible for them to harm God's family. But in a world where hate is presented as the enemy of love instead of a baseline requirement for compassion, at a time when personal responsibility and accountability are an anathema among the politically correct, for us to appreciate what God is going to do, and why He is doing so, most men and women will need to adopt an entirely different perspective. While this may sound harsh to those who have been indoctrinated by religion and politics, it is the most merciful response. Be prepared for of your own volition choose to be ready for, decide upon, accept, and support, be steadfast, standing upright in agreement with Hylel imperative the place of slaughter mat beach, a slaughter yard, from debauch, to slay, butcher, and kill animals in a merciless manner for his immediate offspring La bin Hu, coming toward his Hylel bin Chaka's sons, children, and descendants in association with the perversion, distortion, and corruption A1, the liability and guilt for promoting that which is contrary to the way, the iniquity and wickedness associated with twisting and bending the truth, the damage that has been perpetrated by garbling and misrepresenting the facts, the justifiable consequence of wrongdoing, that perversity and depravity, from Allah, to bend, twist, and distort, to pervert and corrupt, and thus the fabrications of their fathers of them, of their forefathers and ancestors lest, in conjunction with Baal, surely is the Baal, the Lord God of Babylon, from Bala, completely wear out and completely use up, they rise up and exalt themselves, imposing themselves as valid, they fulfill their hostile ambitions and become even more powerful, accomplishing their plans to establish themselves and elevate their status call imperfect active and possess and destroy Yarash, gain possession under false pretenses, seize control, make destitute, impoverish, tread upon and vomit all over the earth Ha'eretz, the land and wafil mail, cover the surface Pana, the appearance, face, and presence of the world Tabal, of the planet with anguishing terror, cities, and shrines with fear, population centers, and temples, with anger, fortified places, and religious structures. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:21. Yahowah is going to slaughter those who have come to slaughter his children, then he will annihilate the religious and political who supported them. It's the right thing to do, the most compassionate. Those who do not make every effort to protect their families from clear and present danger are irresponsible. This is the guidance Yahowah wants us to embrace. So while we cannot play judge or jury, in that we are not God, nor should we act as vigilantes, our Heavenly Father deserves our appreciation rather than scorn for eliminating those threatening the well-being of his family and home at this time. Should Yahowah not act, man would destroy the earth and all life on it. Many will die so that a few will live. It's obvious that God isn't unimpressed with cities, and that he sees them as swamps of human decadence, which makes this one of many places where rendering here as cities misses the point. As was the case in Babel 5,000 years ago, Yahowah's biggest concern with them is their propensity to erect religious shrines and amass devotees. So as it was in the beginning, it will be in the end. Yahowah remains opposed to religious edifices. I will stand up to oppose them Malhem, then I will rise up and establish myself in opposition to them, accomplishing what I had promised, fulfilling my desire to validate, encourage, and restore Kal perfect, prophetically declares Nehemiah, announcing this decision in advance, emphatically states and reveals Yahowah of the spiritual implements Zaba, of the vast multitude heavenly envoys and messengers established in a command and control regimen. I will stop, cut off, and destroy Carrot, I will seize, cut down, tear out, uproot, remove, and banish Hylel perfect the likes of law, that which corresponds with Babel, Babylon, confusion Babel, Babylonia, corruption from intermixing and commingling right and wrong especially in association with the Lord and the Bible, its name Shem, renown and reputation and why its residue Shar, its remnant and remainder, everything which has survived it up to this point, the physical bodies, the souls, and all things which are related to it from the great Isaiah scroll, including the offspring Nin, that which it has propagated, successive generations, that which has come forth and grown out of it, from Nun, to continue to propagate, spread it, and circulate and the message it has broadcast and propagated naked, descendants and posterity, generations of children, and that which is broadly communicated and proliferated, emphatically states Nehemiah, prophetically declares, announcing this decision in advance Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:22. Since the last incarnation of the city of Babylon was buried by the shifting sands of time 20 centuries ago, long banished from the realm of the living, it is what Babel has come to represent which is now being removed and forgotten. Along these lines the most obvious forms of corruption derived from intermingling that has been widely propagated would be the Christian New Testament, the Babylonian Talmud, and the Islamic Quran, along with the Book of Mormon. If you have placed your faith in any of these, you now know your fate. It is by sweeping the debris away that the land becomes habitable again. I suppose you could call God an environmentalist. And what I will cause it to become Samhai, I will make it Kal perfect such that it is suitable Lamorash, so that it is frequented with and covered, from Yarash, seized, inherited, occupied as pools, lakes, and lagoons Agam, still waters and peaceful pools suitable for waterfowl of water mame from the great Isaiah scroll for heron and other long-legged waterfowl Kavad, for a great egret, purple, blue, or tricolored heron, a scarlet, snowy, great, glossy, or white ibis, a crowned crane, painted stork, pink spoonbill, yellow bittern, or flamingo, for an owl as a nocturnal bird of prey, for a porcupine or hedgehog, for anguishing terror and shuddering fear, or for the wrapping up of life. I will sweep it Watete high, I will remove the dirt and unwanted material, cleaning it pilpul perfect. The object suffers the effect of the cleansing which is completed over a finite period of time with by the broom modite, an implement or tool used to sweep dirt off the floor, from tyt, mud, clay, mire, and sticky slime out of a swamp of extermination and decimation shamed, of extinction and annihilation, getting completely rid of that which is ruinous and has been overthrown, prophetically declares Nehemiah, announcing this decision in advance, emphatically states and reveals Yahowah of the spiritual implements Zaba, of the vast multitude heavenly envoys and messengers established in a command and control regimen. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:23. This is one of many prophetic statements affirming that we will go back to the beginning, to Eden, when all is said and done. This is what Sukkah, camping out with God, represents, and why, as the seventh Mikra, it is the ultimate destination. Kafad may be translated as anything from an owl or other nocturnal bird of prey, a heron or related waterfowl including the likes of the great egret, purple, blue, or tricolored heron, scarlet, snowy, glossy, or white ibis, crown crane, painted stork, pink spoonbill, yellow bittern, or flamingo, in addition to a hedgehog or porcupine. In the feminine, Kwaifada means anguish, terror, alarm, fear, or shuddering over a dangerous situation. As a verb, kafad conveys to gather together, roll up, wrap up, and harvest, and is typically used to address rolling up a life such that death is imminent. With all of these options laid out before us, our choices should be guided by context. Yahowah has just removed all traces of Babel, along with those who have served as its hosts, broadcasting its corrupting and confusing message. Therefore, he is engaged in cleansing and restoring his planet, explaining the metaphor, sweeping it with a broom, at the conclusion of the statement. Further, the mention of pools of water serves as a clincher, leading us directly to heron and other waterfowl, making them the most appropriate translation of kafad in this situation. Such birds are among the most elegant and beautifully adorned in the world. Pictures are available at www.pinterest.com/kitcat58hotma/long-legged-birds/. It is all fairly simple and straightforward. Yahowah has sworn a binding oath to provide the benefits of the covenant agreement to anyone and everyone who accepts his conditions. We can absolutely and unequivocally rely on everything he has conveyed to us through his prophets. His offer is extraordinarily generous, and his conditions are not only easily achieved, they are all beneficial. Yahowah of the vast multitude heavenly envoys and messengers Zaba, of the spiritual implements established in a command and control regimen has sworn a binding oath Shaba, has promised and is now affirming, has irrevocably vowed in association with seven in the Shabbat, without exception of Imlo, unconditionally, no questions about it, unwilling to make any concessions, never to be negated, whenever, I have spoken Lamar, consistent with what I've said and promised, regarding what I've expressed in words and as I am like, as I have thought, and as I have planned Kasher Dhamma, consistent with my nature and those things I've shared which are comparable, compatible within the stories I have shared to reveal the correct path to the benefits of the relationship, so shall it be Kanhaya, therefore, correctly, verifiably, justly, and reliably it shall come to exist. Furthermore and moreover, consistent with the benefits of the relationship in the path to walk to life, exactly as Kasher, in the same manner and for the point of comparison regarding the narrow path to walk to get the most out of living, just as I have intended and advised yachts, I have purposed and planned, concluded and decided, counseled and conferred, deliberated and taken action it will stand high, it will be honored and confirmed, it will be kept and fulfilled, it will be accomplished, carried out, and established. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:24. The faithful are predisposed to believe that God can do anything. And yet, that isn't true. For example, he cannot lie. He cannot renege on an agreement such as the covenant. He cannot change his nature or his plan, and as such, he was not replaced by a Jesus, nor was his word altered by a New Testament. He is bound to do what he has promised, which means everything he has predicted through his prophets will transpire. His advice and guidance as it was originally presented in his Torah stands. Even Yahushua made this point abundantly and irrevocably clear in his instruction on the Mount. This is yet another fatal blow to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Their scriptures were not inspired by this God. As Yahowah did for me 16 years ago, he will do for you, confirming that everything he says is reliable, right down to the prepositions. First among them is Asher, the narrow and correct path to walk to give life meaning and to enjoy the benefits of the relationship. And speaking of nuances, in the great Isaiah scroll, the phrase so shall it be is possessive, and thus indicative of Babel. This serves to affirm that God's declarations against the confusing nature of religious corruption will be fulfilled. Before we leave this statement, I'd like to share an additional thought. From the very beginning, and throughout the war Hylel ben Shaka has waged against Yahowah's creation, he has consistently taken God's statements out of context, misrepresented what God has conveyed, negating some of what he has written, and then twisted his testimony, by mixing in his own category of lies, to mislead. So Yahowah is reminding us that this is not acceptable. A flower of truth in a swamp of lies is not a safe place to stand. The fact that a tiny portion of what Paul wrote was true, as was the case when Satan slithered into the garden and spoke to Yahowah, only served to make their lies believable. It wasn't all that long ago, in the 7th chapter of this volume of Observations for Our Time, appropriately entitled, The Assyrian, we were introduced to Satan, learning a great deal about his attitude, his motivations, and his strategy. Now in the midst of this Babylonian presentation of the adversary, we are reacquainted with the Assyrian. So it appears that we were correct. This Babylonian and that Assyrian are one and the same. But this time, Satan isn't boasting. Therefore accordingly, in this regard, to make this so, concerning this point, I will incapacitate and crush Shabawer, I will cripple and stop, I will shatter and break, creating a state of anxiety and anguish, even extreme suffering, smashing and destroying the capabilities of the Assyrian Ashur, the one who fights to conquer, the one who treads upon others in the name of the Lord, a warrior god symbolized as an archer with a winged solar disk in my land Ba'er at Sini, within my country. And Wabonau, on my mountain Harani, my mountain ridgeline, I will trample him down Bubq, I will exert my dominance over him, rejecting and binding him, kicking him about and out, increasing the pressure upon him. Then while his yoke Hu, his means to oppress, burden, and control, from law, to act and deal severely, wantonly and ruthlessly abusing others while making fools of them shall be removed, shall be taken off and abolished, dragged off and vanishing from upon human al-Lada from the great Isaiah scroll verses them in the Masoretic text, and while his oppressive burden Kabal Hu, his propensity to lord over others, controlling them, his works-oriented hardships that are laden upon others and must be borne shall be taken away, cut off and removed from upon your shoulder and ridgeline min al-Shaykamada, from being repetitively placed upon your back, from dwelling among you, and from rising over you, even from upon your ridgeline from the great Isaiah scroll verses them in the Masoretic text. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:25. Yahowah strives to liberate. Satan oppresses. Yahowah removes their burdens. Satan adds to them. In this statement we are reminded that Satan seeks to destroy what Yahowah loves, which is why the scene is focused on Yisrael. We also learn that God has imposed limits upon the adversary, not allowing him to completely destroy Maria. Furthermore, God has openly presented his agenda and has shared his advice. From beginning to end, his plan has been decided upon. Paul was not at liberty to change it, nor were Akiba or Muhammad. This then is the purpose of this advice Zokah 8 Sah, with regard to this conversation, such as the explicit intent of this council providing instructions on what should be done regarding the plan which has been decided upon yachts, on the intent of the plan and the purpose of the advice and counsel concerning the entirety al-Kol, upon the whole of the land Ha'aretz, of the earth, region, or material realm, and while this specifically Zoth is the hand Hayad, the influence and authority that is stretched out Hanata, that is turned aside, inclined, and extended over and against Al, upon untoward, and in opposition to all of the Gentile nations Kol Hagaudim, every Gentile, all ethnicities other than Yisrael, every dying and decaying animalistic religious and geopolitical entity. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:26. God's plan has never been about saving Gentiles, no matter how many Christians and Muslims have been led to believe otherwise. In fact, Yahowah is opposed to the vast preponderance of them because they are habitually in opposition to Yisrael and typically religious. It is only Goyim who walk away from Gentile influences, institutions, and nations, and then who choose to be grafted into Yisrael, who are saved. Paul, Satan's most effective witness, and Muhammad, his most perverted, claim to have received a message annulling what God had revealed. Based upon the overriding conflicts between what they claimed and what we have read, they are wrong. It is so obvious, it's a wonder 4 billion people are clueless about God's position in this regard. Why would anyone rely on a deity who knows his own plan and then replaces it with an entirely different one? Why would he have conveyed his message through the 40 prophets over 1,000 years if he were going to renege on what he had promised? The most basic proposition of the world's leading religions is preposterous. For indeed because truthfully and reliably, Yahowah the spiritual implements Zaba, of the vast multitude heavenly envoys and messengers established in a command and control regimen has determined a plan and intends to carry it out. Yachts, has deliberated and decided, providing all relevant counsel and advice for those seeking to know, and so who will annul it parar, who will nullify and revoke it, thwart or frustrate it, or dissolve it, making it ineffectual by splitting and dividing the covenant into two in direct violation of the agreement. Hylel imperfect, when his hand Yod, and when his influence and authority is stretched out Hanatah, is turned aside, inclined, and extended, so then Wahu or what my, how will turn it away Shwbhu, will turn it around and take it back. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:27. For Christianity, Judaism, and Islam to claim that the Old Testament was inspired by their God, and then use it to establish their credibility, only to contradict everything God said, may be the most irrational proposition ever perpetrated on mankind. But nonetheless, that is the justification for the New Testament, the Talmud, and the Quran. But it gets even worse. The leadership of all three religions will steadfastly claim that mere mortals cannot understand the Old Testament, that scholars and theologians need to explain it to them, which is to say that man is a better communicator than God. Methinks not. Once again, let's listen to Yahowah's position on all of this. Of your own volition, be prepared and ready for a place of slaughter of the immediate offspring in association with his perversions, distortions, and corruptions, especially the liability and guilt associated with promoting that which is contrary to the way by twisting and bending the truth, garbling the message and misrepresenting the facts as they have been portrayed by their fathers, lest, in conjunction with the Lord Baal, the god of Babylon, they rise up and exalt themselves, imposing themselves as valid, fulfilling their hostile ambitions and becoming even more powerful by accomplishing their plans to establish themselves and elevate their status and come to possess and destroy the earth, treading it down under false pretenses, only to fill the surface of the world with anguishing terror, cities, and shrines. 14:21. I will stand up to oppose them, accomplishing what I have promised, fulfilling my desire to validate, encourage, and restore, prophetically declares Yahowah of the spiritual implements. I will stop, destroy, banish, and remove the likes of Babel, Babylon, confusion, especially the corruption derived from intermixing and commingling in association with the Lord and the Bible, its name and its residue, even its remnant, indeed all things which are related to it, including that which it has propagated over successive generations by way of the message it has broadcast and proliferated, emphatically states Yahowah. 14:22. And I will cause it to become such that it is suitable to be occupied by heron and other long-legged waterfowl, even the likes of the great egret, blue heron, scarlet ibis, crown crane, and flamingo, with pools, lakes, and lagoons of still and peaceful waters. I will sweep it, removing the dirt and unwanted material, cleaning it with the broom of extermination and decimation, of extinction and annihilation, getting completely rid of that which is ruinous and has been overthrown, prophetically declares Yahowah of the spiritual implements. 14:23. Yahowah of the vast multitude heavenly envoys and messengers had sworn a binding oath and is now affirming what he has irrevocably vowed in association with 7 in the Shabbat, without exception, unconditionally, no questions about it, because I am unwilling to make any concessions, and therefore it is never to be negated, if I have spoken as I am, as I have thought, and as I have planned, consistent with my nature and those things I have shared which are comparable to me, so shall it be. Furthermore, consistent with the benefits of the relationship in the path to walk to life, exactly as I have intended and advised, purposed and planned, it will stand, being confirmed and fulfilled, accomplished and carried out. 14:24. Therefore, I will incapacitate and crush, cripple and stop, destroying the capabilities of the Assyrian in my land. And upon my mountain I will trample him down, exerting my dominance over him, rejecting and binding him. Then his yoke, his means to oppress and control shall be removed from upon them, and his oppressive burden, his propensity to lord over others, controlling them, shall be taken away and removed from their shoulder, from being repetitively placed upon their back, from dwelling among them, and from rising over them, even from upon their ridgeline. 14:25. This then is the purpose of this advice regarding the plan which has been decided upon concerning the entirety of the land. And this specifically is a hand that is stretched out over and against all of the Gentile nations, every Gentile and all ethnicities other than Yisrael, every dying and decaying animalistic religious and geopolitical entity. 14:26. For indeed, Yahowah of the spiritual implements has determined a plan and intends to carry it out, providing all relevant counsel and advice for those seeking to know, and so who will annul it, revoke it, thwart or frustrate it, or dissolve it, making it ineffectual by splitting and dividing the covenant into two in direct violation of the agreement? When his hand is stretched out, then who or what will turn it away? Yahowah 14:27. One God, one Testament, one Torah, one covenant, one plan. For most, death is the end of life. There is nothing more. There is no reward in heaven nor punishment in hell. That is not the case, however, for cleric or king. For the crimes of falsely claiming to be serving God and of being authorized by him, there is an express ticket to Sheol. Those who have misled countless souls will spend eternity humbled and accountable. This transition from arrogance and riches to humiliation and impoverishment had arrived for Chiz. In the year Bashana King Melechizedek, to be caught grasping and trying to hide died moth, passed away, there came to be Haya, was this prophetic pronouncement Hamasazeh, this prophecy Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:28. Do not celebrate Housamach, rejoice not and do not be overjoyed Philistines, Palestinians Palisheth, foreign invaders and terrorists, any of you Kolat, just because for the reason the larger nation of people wielding the implements of political, religious, economic, and military control Shabbat, the scepter, staff, rod, and spear which struck and afflicted you Nakat, which defeated and slaughtered you, which conquered and killed you, subjugating and ravaging you as broken Shabar, will be destroyed, ceasing to exist. Because, indeed for the reason, for men, out of the serpent's nash, the venomous snakes, the monstrous dragons, and sea serpents all serving as metaphors for Satan depth source, root, underground source, and base will come forth Yatza, will extend, spread out, and be disseminated, broadly and publicly promoted, broadcast, and propagated, a poisonous viper Tsefa, a toxic reptile and venomous, slithering, and twisting snake which extrudes poison and its fruit will be wapari hue, so that which it produces, the resultant offspring will be a flying and shining oob, a winged and airborne, swiftly moving, darting about, and hovering supernatural winged seraph Seraph, poisonous and venomous supernatural being appearing as a fiery serpent, from Seraph, to burn. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:29. While it is obvious that the so-called Palestinian people are not descendants of the Palisheth, Philistines, they not only claim otherwise, the world believes them. So recognizing that this prophecy is depicting future events, I suspect that God is mocking these viciously belligerent Muslims. While it was the Assyrians who were responsible for slaughtering and subjugating the Palisheth, the Philistines would not rejoice at the fall of Nineveh because none would survive that long. However, those who now call themselves Palestinians, those who are foreign invaders and terrorists within Israel, are in fact gleefully celebrating their ability to terrorize, maim, and murder Jews. And now the largest Gentile nation they despise, even though it has supported them, is the United States. They would celebrate America's demise, just as they celebrated the horror of 9/11. So God is telling them that their religious reveling is short-sighted. It's particularly misguided because Hylel ben Shaka has been broadly disseminating, publicly broadcasting, and propagating his demonic diatribe through them. The Assyrian would become Allah, and Islam is the adversary's most overt religion. Satan was initially presented as a snake, slithering into the garden to twist Yahowah's instructions, thereby leading Yahowah astray. The metaphor is apt, because vipers are venomous. Their bite incapacitates and kills their victims, often paralyzing them. They live in dark holes in the ground and attack by stealth, concealing their presence until it's too late for their prey to escape. And they not only move by twisting their bodies, they slither along the ground, symbolic of bending the truth and of bowing down rather than standing up. As such, the serpentine metaphor remains intact through the end of time, with the serpent publicly proclaiming and broadly disseminating his message to the world by way of the religious myths which portray Satan as the Lord God. There will be some, however, who will be spared the serpent's bite, remaining immune to his toxic religious venom and political vitriol. And these are the firstborn of Israel, those standing at Passover's door, those open and receptive to their father's invitation to come home. And then while the firstborn Bakor, the eldest children with the greatest birthright of those at the open door of the unpretentious at the entrance, and while those who are not part of the religious or political establishment and are willing to accept the Father Ebion, those who know what they want from the Father and who respond favorably to his invitation, from Ab, Father and Abba, to be willing, open, desiring, and accepting, they will live in rest or bots, they will be able to sit and lie down, dwelling and abiding by confidently trusting and relying La Baitak, in safety and security, without vulnerabilities, in total confidence and complete reliance. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:30. This is the fulfillment of Yahowah's most important and most often repeated promise, the reconciliation of his relationship with Yisrael and Yadam, their restoration to the covenant family. Therefore, with Ebion we find something I have long suspected affirm. Those who are welcomed home are like Abraham before them. Prior to this, they have walked away from religion and politics, choosing to rely upon Yahowah instead. They genuinely want to know their Heavenly Father and are open to His instructions and receptive to His invitations, confidently accepting His testimony as trustworthy and reliable. It is the way God has always operated, never approaching until after an individual has at least begun his or her journey away from the deadly and debilitating religious and political deceptions of man. Such will be the case in the last days. So now you are empowered with this vital information. Please take advantage of what Yahweh is offering. There is no rational reason to be counted among those Yahowah must kill to remove the toxin from his home, but there are a plethora of religious justifications for profaning it. There are countless bad trees which must be uprooted for the one good tree, the tree of lives, to flourish. And in this case, since the invading terrorists known as the Palestinians, Philistines, Palestinians were the most recently mentioned people, they are the ones who will be uprooted and die. But why by starving out your root Bahar Absorshat, by depriving and plaguing the underground source and base, even the depths from the great Isaiah scroll verses see in the Masoretic text, I will put to death and dispatch Move, I will deprive of their mortal lives Hifil perfect whatever remains of you Sherethat, your remnant and descendants, the residue of you who survive and remain, those left behind, destroying your ag, killing and eliminating you. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:30. Yahowah isn't actually talking about felling trees, but instead about uprooting and removing the last of the Palestinians from Israel. Those who sought to obliterate God's land and annihilate his people deserve nothing less. They will be dispatched along with their despicable God. And speaking of Allah, it is interesting that this chapter on Hylel ben Shakha concludes using one of the two verbs lurking within his name. Furthermore, it is reassuring to find the wannabe Philistines at the center of the following rebuke, affirming that we were correct in our previous assessment. As we approach God's next statement, much of it is easy to translate, in that every aspect of Yahweh, to wail, Zok, to cry out, and Mug, to dissolve is negative. And as such, the only reasonable approach to Sar, floodgate and Ur, city is to consider and apply the most negative connotations of these words. Wail, howling in distress Yahweh, shout and cry out the sounds of sorrow, mourning and lamenting what has occurred, O floodgate of the assembly which is horrid and disgusting, you rotten fruits are, gateway and gatekeeper to fruit which has burst open after going bad. Cry out Zok, plea for help amidst the pain and emotional anguish O city of asses and terrorists who have been roused up here, population of vicious inhabitants and brutal donkeys, from you, roused, stirred up, and incited. Melt away Mug, dissolve and liquefy unable to resist the power and force exerted, become faint, collapse, flow away, and dissipate O Palestinians Palestinians, foreign invaders and terrorists, aliens who roll about in the dust and ashes while mourning. For indeed because, out of men, from the north Zophon, the left hand, those who try to conceal their manure, hide their dung, and treasure their poo there is smoke, an obscuring phenomenon which blocks the light of shine, that which is opaque and obscures the heavens by blowing smoke is a metaphor for deceptive statements, from Ashan, to fume and be furious, which will come will approach and arrive, and while there is not even a solitary soul who will remain in Baghdad, there isn't an isolated individual, not a single straggler, no one who will individually withdraw who is left alone in his military ranks at the appointed time Bamawadehu, within the assigned places of his soldiers, from road, appointed meeting time. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:31. It is always reassuring to find the symbolism aligning to form a clear picture. Here, the root of Sar, which depicts rotten fruit bursting open after it has gone bad, tying in nicely with the previous metaphor which spoke of starving roots. While God's chosen people will rejoice, those who have sought to harm them will cry, lamenting what is befalling them. It is the opposite of what they expected. They had unleashed the floodgates of horrid weapons and reviling slogans against Yerushalayim, equipping wave after wave of Islamic jihadists, believing that what they had incited would be the final solution to their Jewish problem. But the Palestinian asses they would deploy would be no match for Yah, and unlike Jews, God is intolerant. Even in this we find consistency in Yahowah's testimony. In Berith, Genesis, he would call the descendants of Ishmael, today's Muslims, wild asses of men whose hand would be raised against his brother and who will live in hostility with the entire world. And yet moronically, the world's political and religious leaders desperately want to give the city of Jerusalem to the invading terrorists masquerading as Palestinians. It will not happen. The combined influence of the rulers of every nation, the force of every military on earth, even with Satan's assistance, will be no match for the will and intent of Yahowah. He will turn all of them into goo, dissolving them so that they flow away and dissipate into the ether of the abyss. The expected response of those who armed and equipped these jihadists will be to blow smoke, to obscure the truth, and try and block the approach to the light. But even in this they will fail. Not one of them will remain in their position, none will be left behind. And should you wonder who those out of the north may be, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Europe, Russia, China, and the United States are north of Jerusalem. The timing of this is particularly telling. Maude is based upon road, revealing that Israel's foes will be obliterated at the appointed meeting time which we know to be Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations. The final ethnic, militant, religious, and political cleansing will occur on Sunday evening as the sun sets in Yerushalayim, October 2, 2033. Mark your calendars, Muslims, and those who have courted them, have lost the final battle. There is nothing left to say other than to finally admit the truth. And recognizing that Go'i is singular in this next pronouncement, the ambassadors of the One World government, now menacing the planet in league with their demonic accomplices, will realize that they have fought against Yahowah and that God won. Then what ma, how will the leaders Melech, the rulers and governments from the great Isaiah scroll versus Malach, messengers in the Masoretic text of the Gentile nations Go'i, of the people who are not Yisrael answer in response to Anna, reply they is from the great Isaiah scroll, that, surely because yes, indeed, truthfully and verifiably, Yahowah founded and has established Yaakov, has ordained, appointed, constituted, made, and is associated with Zion, the signs posted along the way and why and her Bahai, in association with it and in accord with her from the great Isaiah scroll, those of his family who answer and respond after having been afflicted in Yamhu, those of his people who reply in the midst of the oppression, from Anna, to answer and respond, to be afflicted and oppressed shall find safety and comfort through trust and reliance shall confide, seek refuge, find protection, and express their hope. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahowah, Isaiah 14:32. It has always been true. It will not change. Yahowah established his signs in Yisrael, not in the Vatican nor in Mecca. He does not have a church and he did not speak through a perverted Arab messenger. The lone path to God is where it has always been. Men have failed in their attempts to move it. Moreover, salvation is afforded to those who trust and rely, and is not for those who believe. To find the way home, one has to read the signs posted along the way. Here is a summation of Satan's final foray into the land. In the year King Achaz died came this prophetic pronouncement 14:28. Do not celebrate or be overjoyed, any of you Philistines, Palestinians, you foreign invaders and terrorists, just because the implements of political, religious, economic, and military control, the scepter, staff, rod, and spear, which struck and afflicted you, which defeated and slaughtered you, subjugating and ravaging you, has been broken and will be destroyed. For indeed, from the serpent's depths, his root and underground source, a poisonous viper, a venomous, slithering, and twisting snake which extrudes poison, will come forth, spread out, and be disseminated, broadly and publicly promoted, broadcast, and propagated. And its fruit, that which it produces, will be a flying supernatural winged seraph appearing as a fiery serpent. 14:29. And then the firstborn of those at the open door, the unpretentious with the greatest inheritance, and those who are not part of the religious or political establishment and are willing to accept the Father, those who know what they want from the Father and who respond favorably to his invitation, will live and find rest, dwelling confidently by trusting and relying. But I will put to death and dispatch, depriving of their mortal lives, by starving out your roots so that whatever remains of you will die. 14:30. Wail and cry, howling in distress, mourning and lamenting what has occurred, O floodgate of the assembly which is horrid and disgusting, the rotten fruit which has burst open after going bad. Cry out and plead for help amidst the pain and emotional anguish, O city of terrorists, you donkeys and asses who have been roused, stirred up, and incited. Melt away and dissolve, because you are unable to resist the power and force which will be exerted, causing you to collapse, flow away, and dissipate, O Palestinians, you foreign invaders and terrorists. For indeed, out of the north, from those who try to conceal their manure, hide their dung, and who treasure their own excrement, smoke will come. That which is opaque and blocks the light will arrive, because they will blow smoke, making deceptive statements which will come to obscure the truth, and there will not be even a solitary soul remaining, not a single straggler left alone in his military ranks at the appointed meeting time. 14:31. Then what will the messengers, envoys and ambassadors, especially the spiritual implements allied with Satan and now in association with the Gentile nation answer in response? That surely, truthfully and verifiably, Yahowah founded, has established, and is still associated with Zion, the signs posted along the way. And in her, in association and accord with the signs, those of his family who answer and respond after having been afflicted shall find safety and comfort through trust and reliance. Yahshua 14:32. And thus concludes this chapter of the story we have been pursuing. We have come to know the adversary, how he works and what he has done, even how he will fail in the end. And we have found him in the place mankind least expects. He isn't involved with seances or satanic rituals, but instead inspiring the world's leaders and is the Lord God of religion.